everybody, I hope you're all well. So today I'm going to be discussing the ongoing war, it seems like, between baby boomers and sometimes Gen X versus millennials and Gen Z. I think especially at the moment this seems to be more prominent than ever, obviously not only with the political climate and the state of the economy, but also the literal pandemic we're going through right now. And also this has sort of come to my attention a little bit more because of the rise of okay boomer memes and also Karen memes and the controversy around them. I live for drama sometimes, so I've kind of been loving every single second of research for this video. And I am going to throw a couple of disclaimers in here. Obviously there's going to be a lot of generalizations, you know, I'm going to say for example that boomers were the generation responsible for voting in Ronald Reagan as president. Does that mean that all boomers voted in Ronald Reagan as president? No, of course not. But when I say boomers tend to act like this, obviously I'm not talking about all boomers. Same with millennials and Gen Z. I could say Gen Z are very tech savvy and they grew up with technology, but obviously not every single person who's part of Gen Z grew up with technology. And also this is very adhered to Western culture and in particular America, because that was what I could find the most information on. I would love to try and open up a calm, please, discussion in the comments of all age ranges, because I'd love to know you guys' opinion on this, especially people who aren't from the Western world, other parts of the world. I'd love to hear what you guys think of this as well, and whether your generations are very similar to how our generations are here in the UK, the US, Western society, And just before I do get into this video, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. I upload commentary videos, and also don't forget to follow my Instagram. I'm very bored on there. I nearly have 7,000 followers, which means I nearly have 10,000 followers, which means I nearly have the swipe up feature, the only thing that I want in my life. So the first thing I want to start out with is the generations. What are they? What are they like? Who are they? Etc. Obviously I have condensed this a lot for the sake of this video, otherwise I could literally be here forever. There is so much more information out there. I found a lot of my information on Wikipedia actually. Wikipedia was banging for this kind of information, so I'd highly recommend just checking out if you want to learn some more about it. Obviously there is also the greatest generation and the silent generation, but I'm not going to be talking about them in today's video. I'm going to be just breaking down as quickly as I can baby boomers, Gen X, millennials and Gen Z. And obviously my information is a lot more limited when it comes to millennials and Gen Z because they haven't even lived out half of their lives yet, unlike baby boomers and Gen X where I could find a lot more information. So let's start out with baby boomers first. They were born between 1946 to 1964. They are called baby boomers because of the large spike in birth rates after the Second World War, and they are known to be wealthier, more active and more physically fit than any other generation before them. As children they grew up with transistor radios. They could listen to a lot of rock and roll music, a lot of Beatles music, and they were also the first generation to grow up with easily accessible televisions. They used to watch shows like the Mickey Mouse Club. So as young adults, this is where shit starts to get interesting. Because of the political climate in the 60s and 70s, there was the birth of counterculture. There was civil rights movements and a second wave of feminism. Despite this counterculture though, there were still quite a lot of boomers who were veering in a different direction when it came to politics and going to the more conservative side, especially boomers who had more of a professional career, such as the military, blue-collar jobs, Republican politics, police force. Another thing which I found quite interesting is that older boomers tend to be Democrats, meanwhile younger boomers tend to be Republicans. In their midlife there was a rise of conservatism, I hope that's the right word, and a lot of them regretted the cultural changes that the civil rights movement brought forward, that they helped themselves bring forward. And baby boomers were the largest voting demographic to vote in Ronald Reagan. If you guys don't know about Ronald Reagan, I'm not an expert on politics, but he seems like a dick. There's so much more information on Ronald Reagan, but I just decided to choose a few little examples. Ronald Reagan being elected as president definitely increased income inequality. So for example, between 1979 to 2007, the top 1% of American earners' income increased by 278%, and those in the top 40 to 60% only increased by 35%. And this is going to absolutely blow your mind because it blew my mind as well. Since the 1980s, a majority of boomers have obviously already graduated from college. Since 1980, college costs have increased by 600%, and that is even adjusted to inflation. So let's talk about Generation X. They are born between 1965 to 1980, and they are also known as a latchkey generation because of the lack of parental supervision, because of increased divorce rates and more women going to work. Divorce rates also peaked in the 80s because the excuse of staying together for the children didn't seem very legitimate anymore. People would literally rather go and get divorced. But a lot of children who did grow up in divorced parents' households had a very limited or no relationship with usually their father, especially because in America it was only legal in 9 states to have joint custody. And most of Gen X were very politically conscious during Ronald Reagan's presidency, where they were seeing the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. And just an example, federal debt during Reagan's 8-year presidency had increased from 998 billion to 2.8 trillion. And a few other sort of little facts about Gen X is they grew up in the AIDS epidemic and the crack epidemic. They were also the first generation to grow up with easily accessible computers, and on top of that they were the least racist generation of any generation before them. And it's also believed that Gen X was the last generation to experience the true financial benefits of going to college. You know, this is due to, first of all, pay not going up at the same rate that inflation is going up, and on top of that, college costs have just completely skyrocketed in the last 20 years. Family income did actually increase for Gen X due to it now being the norm for both parents to work, but individual incomes decreased and weren't matching up with inflation. Now let's talk about millennials. Like I said before, I have quite limited information on millennials and Gen Z, but millennials are born between 1981 to 1996. They are the most confident and the most tolerant generation of any generation before them, but according to psychologist Jean Twenge, in her book Generation Me, they are the most entitled and narcissistic. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but something which I find quite interesting is millennials tend to be the least proud of their generational title. In a survey, 43% of millennials actually identified as Generation X. Is this because of the constant media scrutiny that millennials are under? Probably. They are known to be very good multitaskers, very tech savvy, and they are also the second most diverse generation, the first most diverse generation being Gen Z. The first most diverse generation, the most diverse generation being Gen Z, God. They also tend to be quite civic minded. They care a lot about inequalities in life, whether it's based on race, sex, sexual orientation, etc. And they also care a lot about the growing gap between the rich and the poor. Let's talk about Gen Z. That's me. Gen Z is born between 1997 to, I believe, 2012, but where it ends is very blurred. We don't quite know yet. They are the most racially diverse generation, and they are also the first generation to grow up with a lot of technology around them, so they're very technologically literate. They're very tech literate. They're very digitally literate. Unlike millennials, Gen Z have little to no memory of 9/11, which I think 9/11, especially for millennials, really shaped their way of thinking. But some people of Gen Z do have memory of the 2008 recession, where they probably saw a lot of adults around them financially struggling. A US survey by Ameritrade on 20,000 Gen Zers, 47% were concerned about student debt, meanwhile 36% were worried about even being able to afford to go to college at all. They do have the shortest attention spans, I blame Vine for that, but they also are the best multitaskers. And this is sort of just my personal opinion. Despite Gen Z being labelled constantly by older people as snowflakes, I definitely think Gen Z is probably the most ironic and the most sarcastic generation to ever come before them. And I do think that snowflake label is given to millennials and Gen Z because they do call out bullshit like racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, sexism. It don't fly. That shit does not run with millennials and Gen Z, okay? They are the most well-behaved and educated generation, but also the most stressed and depressed. A lot of people do blame social media for it, which I do think is a contributing factor, but I also think a very big contributing factor is the economy and the political climate. And it's also shown in research that Gen Z do not support free speech if it is deemed as offensive to a religious religious group or a minority. The top Gen Z concerns, this is quite interesting, is extremism and terrorism, war, the widening gap between the rich and the poor, lack of access to education, climate change, and this one's really interesting, the risk of a global pandemic. Also, Gen Z, I mean at least I did anyway, grew up in the midst of a very high volume of terrorist attacks and a lot of reporting on terrorism and extremism. There was obviously the Manchester bombings, the 7/7 bus bombings, there was the Paris attacks, there was the Charlie Hebdo shooting. Obviously that is an extremely small handful. There are so many more all over the world, not just in Europe. And of course there was also non-religious motivated terrorism as well, such as school shootings. Gen Z are the most supportive generation when it comes to same-sex marriage and abortion, and also the least religious generation. I am actually one of the oldest of Gen Z. I was born in 1998. I'm 21 years old. I felt like I had a super weird childhood, and I kind of just want to talk about this for a second and see if anyone else who's sort of an older Gen Z can relate to this. So when I was very young, like 4 to 7, I very vividly remember having a family computer, having VHS tapes, and then when I got older having like DVDs and DVD players, and going to Blockbuster as well. I actually got my first phone when I was 11 years old. I got this one, I still have it. It is the LG Slide. Ooh, flex on them like this, but I did. This was my first phone, and I remember shitting myself whenever I accidentally pressed the internet button. But before I had this, I used to message my friends on MSN Messenger. What a throwback. And then when I was in secondary school, so between ages of 12 and 14, I had a BlackBerry. Most of us had a BlackBerry, and we would use BBM, which is BlackBerry Messenger. And that was sort of my first experience with real social media, because my mum wouldn't let me have Facebook. And then suddenly I remember from age 15 onwards, everyone got iPhones, and suddenly Instagram and Twitter were a huge part of our lives, and we were constantly on our phones, really. I mean, especially because now 4G is completely normal. Does anyone remember when you could not use the internet on your phone without it charging your phone like £10 for like 1 minute of internet? Now I've sort of broken down the generations ever so slightly. I only scratched the surface, but we haven't got time, people. So I kind of want to talk about who started it. And you know, I don't want to particularly blame anyone, but I do think boomers started it. Maybe I'm biased. This video is probably going to be very biased because obviously I'm part of Gen Z and I'm very defensive of my generation. God. I remember growing up in my teenagehood from ages around 15 probably, constantly seeing articles completely shitting on millennials, blaming the fact that they can't get on the property market for buying too much prep coffee, or PC culture's gone crazy. But I've found out that it is not abnormal for people to automatically dislike people younger than them. It's actually very normal. We can already see people my age and a bit older already sort of kind of coming for people younger than them, whether it's because Disney shows nowadays suck, and it's like they don't suck, we just prefer the shows we watch because we watched them when we were children, and then on top of that, when we rewatch them, it's so nostalgic and we love that feeling. It doesn't necessarily mean that Disney Channel shows have gotten worse as we've gotten older. And on top of that, you'll see videos of like 14-year-olds not knowing certain Usher songs, and suddenly a load of 20-year-olds is like, you should die, how do you not know this Usher song? That's what I want to start out with, the psychology behind why older people hate younger people, or just why people hate people younger than them in general. It's actually a pattern for generations to be extremely hypercritical of any generation beneath them. Why is this? Why can't we break this pattern? Because it's literally been going on for years. You can go back on literal ancient texts like 400 BC Greek text of the older Greek people criticizing the younger people. This was between 600 to 300 BC. It was ancient Greek texts, and it was complaints about children becoming tyrants, contradicting their parents, and eating all of the best treats at the table. How dare you eat all of the best treats at the table? Fuck! And this has been repeated over history. You could literally go on any ancient text and you will find some sort of youth bashing, and most of it boils down to older generations thinking that any generation beneath them is too soft. And this softness nowadays is often referred to as entitlement. Yes, we've all heard it 1,000 times. Older people calling younger people so entitled. And a lot of this hostility boils down to fear. The fear of being replaced, for example. When a new generation starts to make their way into the workplace, they may not have the experience that an older generation would have, like 10, 20 plus years experience, but especially millennials and Gen Z, they're faster thinkers, they're faster paced, and on top of that, they are better educated than ever, according to statistics, and they're also good multitaskers. So I think that older generations start to shit themselves a little bit and realise that they aren't irreplaceable, that they aren't this all-important cog in their workplace that if you took it out it would fall apart. They've kind of realised that they are disposable, and there's also life going on without us. Death is something which we can never really wrap our heads around, if I'm going to be completely honest. So, you know, as younger generations start to grow up and go into adulthood, they start sort of invading the workplace in a way. It almost feels like the older generation feel like they're being pushed out because you're no longer top priority because you aren't in your prime anymore. And I guess it's sort of that idea that you're becoming more and more irrelevant, I guess, because it is kind of impossible that the older you get, you will eventually become out of the loop with how society is. And another reason for youth bashing could be that adults do not have a clear memory of how they were as children. It's normal to look back on your past self and your child self, your young adult self, with rose-tinted glasses, and you piece together sort of how you were then with some of the characteristics of how you are now. So you sort of have almost this glamorized image of how you used to be, and you compare the youth of today to how you thought you were, not how you actually were. I know this is kind of like very unsatisfying, but youth bashing is kind of just one of those things. It's always going to be around, I feel like. I think it's just a normal thing for adults to judge children very harshly. For example, authoritarians think children are less respectful. Well-read adults think that children are less interested in reading, and intelligent adults think that children aren't as smart. Yet Generation Z is the most educated generation ever. And it's really hard to prove that a whole generation is less respectful or doesn't read much. And I don't think it's fair for boomers to compare how they were at that age to millennials, if you guys know what I mean, because the economy has changed a lot and so has the political climate. This is just a few examples of how much the economy has changed since boomers were our age. This is in the US, by the way. At the moment, millennials own 3% of US wealth, but when boomers were the same age as millennials, they owned 21% of US wealth. And another statistic from the US is that the wealth gap between the old and the young has actually doubled in the last 20 years. Today, the average 20 to 35-year-old's household net worth is $103,000. Meanwhile, if you're aged 52 to 70, the average household net worth is $1.2 million. And just to fry your mind a little more, like I said, in the last 20 years it had doubled. So since 1998, 20 to 35-year-olds household net worth has actually decreased. It's decreased by $2,600. Meanwhile, age 52 to 70, it's actually increased by $452,000. So like I said before, I feel like growing up and even now, older people just seem to shit all over young people all the time. Especially they love to throw the insult snowflake and PC culture. So for example, someone will make a racist joke and someone will call them out and they'll start talking about how sensitive this generation is, PC culture, snowflakes, meh. If you knew how Gen Z especially is, you would know that we are the most sarcastic and, like I said, ironic generation. And I definitely think with the way the world is and the way the world is so bleak, Gen Z do look for humour in everything really, but we draw the fucking line. So as I said, for a long time, us, Gen Z and also millennials were constantly being called snowflakes, constantly talking about PC culture obsessed and SJWs, and finally the perfect clapback was born. Okay, boomer. The term OK Boomer can actually be traced all the way back to a Reddit post in 2009, and it was also used on the website 4chan in 2015. The term was popularized when an old conservative gentleman decided to post a TikTok where he was going about how Gen Z and millennials have Peter Pan syndrome and we're living in a utopia, and it was super patronizing, super condescending. It pissed me off when I watched it, to be honest. And a TikTok user by the name Lynn duetted the TikTok and just put OK Boomer. I believe she was the one that popularized it, but please let me know if I'm wrong, but that's what I found in my research. OK Boomer is really just a response to out-of-date generational ideals. It's the same way that older people will call us a snowflake. We just say OK Boomer. I feel like OK Boomer is the perfect way to end a debate which is going nowhere. I will happily debate with people who have opposing political opinions to me, just opposing values to me in general. I like to sort of debate with people and try to get them to understand my point of view, but if I'm just being called a snowflake over and over and over again and I feel like it's going absolutely nowhere, saying OK Boomer is just the perfect way to put a pin in it, really. OK Boomer was a cultural reset. There was merch, which I kind of love the fact that a lot of Gen Zers were monetizing on the OK Boomer meme. On top of that, there was music, there was catchy songs, there was the OK Boomer girl who loved Bernie Sanders. I couldn't stop thinking about her for a really long time. I don't know why, she overtook my mind. And of course, with the rise of OK Boomer, there was backlash. It was accused of being an ageist term. I mean, it's not like millennials have been called lazy and entitled for the last 10 years. And some of the responses were so extreme that it was actually unbelievably entertaining to watch this all unfold. So conservative radio host Bob Lonsbury, I have no idea who he is. I believe he tweeted it, but he may have said this on this radio show, that the term boomer was the N-word of ageism. Oh my god. Guys, I'm gonna be completely honest with you here. I have been on this planet for 21 years. I have seen some stupid shit. But I have never, ever heard anything so fucking moronic in my life. I mean, we get called snowflakes for literally 10 years, but as soon as we call you a boomer, oh my god, it's like the world's ending. You can't make it up. You literally can't make it up. And speaking of the controversy over OK Boomer, there was the birth of the Karen meme, and recently the Karen meme has gained even more controversy. I love it. If you guys don't know what the Karen meme is, it's basically sort of a piss take about how older women, older people in general really, but particularly older women, how they treat customer service workers like shit. And I know this for a fact. I work in customer service anyway, obviously not at the moment, but I'm a beautician at the moment, but luckily I seem to get nearly all nice clients. When I worked at a Starbucks drive-thru for 2.5 years, I came across so many Karens, and they always have the same Karen haircut. You can spot a Karen from a mile away, and they always demand to speak to the manager, lack any understanding. It is believed that the Karen meme was born on, all places, Reddit. Basically, there was an anonymous user who used to rant about his bitch ex-wife Karen, which created the r/fuck you Karen, which used to be memes about this guy's ex-wife, but it's now turned into just a place where everyone posts their Karen memes. The meme has developed even more recently. It's ascended. The Karen meme has ascended. Because now there's sort of the Karens of different age ranges, you know, the older Karens being Sharons and Gertrudes, and then the younger Karens being Becky and Mackenzie. One of my favourite tweets of the year, I think, is the fact that the 2050 Karen is gonna be Emma. Older people, especially older women obviously, started to get offended. They called it ageist and they compared it to a racial slur. They started saying that Karen was a racial slur against white people. Lord, give me some strength. And I would love to go on a huge rant about how Karen and boomer is not anywhere near comparable to a racial slur, but I will be here forever. But all I am going to say is racial slurs, the N-word for example, literally represents years, hundreds of years of oppression and slavery. And I know someone in the comments is going to say slavery's been abolished. Has it really though? Because the US prison system is literally just slavery dressed up. Don't you fucking dare compare Karen and boomer to a racial slur when white people can peacefully protest with shotguns about having to quarantine because of a global fucking pandemic, and black people go and protest about black people literally being killed for being black, yet they are met with even more hostility and unnecessary aggression from the police. It annoys me. It annoys me. It annoys me. I mean, Karen and boomer, it's just a bit of fun. Don't be such a snowflake. Don't be such a snowflake getting offended. This is my freedom of speech. And I think that the Karen and boomer memes response is the most Gen Z you could ever get. And this is why I'm very much proud to be Gen Z. I'm so fucking proud to be Gen Z. I think that Karen and boomer is a great way to make a joke out of something shit, like being treated like shit in your customer service job, being told by older people that you're a failure because you can't get on the property market. It's a great way to find humour in a really shit situation, because I think that's what Gen Z do best, and I think that's what sets Gen Z apart from any other generation, is finding humour in shit situations, because the world and the future seems pretty bleak, but at least we can sort of make a joke and laugh about it. So will this generational war end anytime soon? Honestly, I really doubt it. But I hope that we now, as younger people, don't repeat how older people are acting, because I think that we should give young people a chance. But yes, no, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll be back soon for another video. Goodbye!